Hi, and welcome to another episode of the Content Marketing Lounge podcast. My name is Nathan Collier. I am I'm the host of the show. I am the founder and admin of the Content Marketing Lounge community. If you are not yet a member of our community, it's free to join. You can find us by just open up the Facebook app, search for Content Marketing, and you'll find us listed there under the groups button. We'll be right up there with, I'm sure, a couple of groups run by HubSpot and other large companies. But we are an independent podcast. We were founded in August of 2015. So in just another month, we will be celebrating the 7-year anniversary of our group. So 7,700 people. We add maybe 3-4 people per day. So what I like to say is we strive to be the most supportive community for content marketers anywhere on the web. So I hope you will come join us. Today I have I'm really excited about this interview. I think sometimes it's easy to sort of go after and have conversations with people about the, massive success they've had in their business. And, these are the stories that we hear everywhere. But sometimes it's even more interesting to hear from people who had really big dreams of things that they thought would turn into really massive financial successes. And so they built a thing and it was successful in many, many ways. But maybe it wasn't as successful financially as they hoped. And I've definitely felt that over the years. And the story today that I'm going to bring you today, today's interview is was with Garrett Carlson, who is he's a content marketer, full-time content marketer today. Prior to that, he was a high school English teacher. And then for a few years, he founded a website called Dudefluencer, which there's a podcast associated with that as well as some other media. And Garrett was on my radar because of that, even a few years before now. And so he and I have had kind of an ongoing sort of Facebook chat thread going for I think about a year now about a variety of topics. And so Dudefluencer was, you'll hear him describe this in the episode, but his vision for it was to come at masculinity from the positive side of things and really to focus on what does it mean to be a male today? What does that even mean? And what do we do about topics like male loneliness, and how do you even make friends as a guy, as an adult? Something that, as we got into, as you'll hear, resonated very deeply with me as well. And so lots of good stuff in this episode, some of it business, some of it personal. But I'll leave Garrett to explain so much of that. But this is one of those episodes, just to warn you, that sort of builds throughout the episode. And I love how his story sort of weaves together a number of themes that certainly resonate with the story that I've lived. And I think the story of many people who started a thing and grew that thing to be a pretty cool thing. And yet, like, what do you do with something like that if it doesn't become, the huge, if it doesn't make you rich? What do you do with something like that? And so we talk about that and so much more in this episode. So with that, as the intro, here's my conversation with Garrett Carlson, founder of Dudefluencer. Hey, Garrett, thanks for joining me today.
Thank you for inviting me. It's so nice to chat with you.
We've chatted over I don't know, the last year or two via DM. And before I click record, I was just saying it's always fun to talk to somebody after I've talked to somebody for a while. You said, like, realize that we're real people. It's like I feel like I've been living that life for long before the pandemic. So it's great to chat with you today. Would you just introduce yourself? Tell us who you are, what you do, and then we'll get into it.
Sure. My name is Garrett, and I am a content marketer via the world of high school education. I started my professional career as a high school English teacher, as a creative writing teacher, and after about 6 years, I transitioned into the world of content marketing. And I think ultimately, at the end of the day, the sort of the unifier of the entire process has always been that I've been a writer. I like to always describe myself as really a writer.
So I think there's so many people who have kind of some version of that story. Me too, right? Which is, I never set out to be a content marketer. I had a skill set that was, for me, it was writing too, same thing. And then I found out that it was really valuable in the content marketing space. And so that's what brought me here and has kept me here. That's why I enjoy doing this work. Let's start there. Like, how did you, why high school education to start? And then what made you make the jump to content marketing?
So it's really interesting in terms of when I was doing my bachelor's degree, I spent a lot of my time working for my university newspaper. So I was always writing, but then when you graduate with an English degree and you're, 21, 22 years old, you're kind of like, what do I do from here? Should I be a professional writer? Does that job even exist? The newspapers aren't hiring. So I went on this really, really bad job interview, and I love telling the story. It was for the advertisement was for a technical writing position. And I get to the interview and they started asking me, are you comfortable, doing some cleaning around the office? And I said, sure. I wanted a job. So I said, of course. And then they asked if I wanted to do some IT work. And I said, I can probably figure that out. But
I can see where this is going.
the big finale for me was the person I was interviewing with asked, we get some birds up in our attic. Would you be willing to, maybe just get a broom and like once a week go up there and get them out of there?
Oh man, that's brutal.
Yeah. So I realized, being an English teacher has to be better than that. So I call it teaching school. It was like a 3-year program where I would get my teaching license and get my master's at the same time. And I loved it. I absolutely loved it. It was amazing. And I grew up in Buffalo. I went to school in Buffalo. And when I graduated with my teaching license, there was really a difficult time finding jobs as an educator. So I moved 8 hours away to Virginia and started teaching English. After my second year, they kind of let me create a creative writing program. And a couple of years after that, I ended up transitioning to a magnet school where I got to create a creative writing program, which was just a ton of fun.
Very cool. So I'm going to come back to that in a minute. So at some point you do that for a while, and then you stop doing that for a while. Why?
I think ultimately I love education. I loved mentoring my students. I loved working with my students. I loved creating these projects. At the end of the day, there's ultimately, I think one of the big issues with education is at the end of the day, you don't necessarily know who your boss is, who you're really responsible to, whether it's, am I responsible for the student? Am I responsible to the parent? Am I responsible to administration? And all of those people don't necessarily have aligned desires, and trying to appease everyone with different goals and different wants by doing the same job, it just kind of sucked the fun out of it for me. And I wasn't happy. I was really dealing with some depression. I was coming home. I was, I'd work, from 7 o'clock to 2:30, come home at 3, sleep until 6. And it became this pattern. And the biggest realization for me was there was a Krispy Kreme donuts on the way to work. And I suddenly realized I was going there more and more often before work just to kind of get this like sugar rush. It's just something to like make me happy. And eventually they remembered what my order was. And that's when I just kind of like a switch just flipped for me. Like, oh, I am really unhappy at my job. I need to do something else. And of course there's other just, small factors that, we're very kind of school specific, but I think at the end of the day, any school I go to, I'm going to have similar sort of frustrations with just education in general, just the way it's designed and the way it's run. So it was just kind of time for me.
So you quit, you start something else of your own. Tell us about that. I'm going to come back to that sugar comment, by the way, because I love donuts. So we'll talk about like self-care and why here in a minute. But just to jump forward, you start something of your own.
Yeah. So when I quit teaching, I actually didn't have a plan. I had no job lined up. I had no idea what I wanted to do for the rest of my life. I just knew that come, June 16th, I turn in my key and I'm done. At the same time that I had been working on the creative writing program, I was also at Johns Hopkins finishing up a master's in nonfiction. And I had been focusing a lot of my studies on just masculinity in general. I had a lot of questions. I had a lot of thoughts, and it was something that was really interesting for me to explore as a nonfiction writer. So I did a couple interviews post my teaching, and one day with my wife, we were talking about sort of my project, and she was the one who came up with the idea, just the term Dudefluencer, an influencer for dudes. And she said, why don't you just take your writing? I can teach you a little bit about content marketing. I can give you some books. I can kind of help you out, at the beginning and get you started. So I said, sure. We were lucky enough that she was willing to, be the breadwinner for a little bit while I started this project to get it off the ground. And I really didn't know what I wanted it to be at first. And I think that's kind of a pattern with the project itself. But ultimately, what I really ended up figuring out and identifying was I wanted to create a writing project there are a ton of articles about toxic masculinity. I think it's incredibly easy to identify. I think you just say the term, people know what that means. They know examples of it. And there aren't a lot of examples of what comes next. What are those next steps? How do you get beyond that? And I wanted to create a website that really explored what are those next steps? What is the best way to help men? And more specifically, it was a little selfish in a way as well, because I had been experiencing a lot of male loneliness. I moved from Buffalo to Virginia by myself. I didn't know anyone. They don't tell you how to make friends as an adult, so that's always difficult. So selfishly, I just wanted to learn and research all of this stuff for myself. And if I could help someone else, if I could be the writer that I wanted or needed when I was younger, then it was a win for me. And if I could turn it into a career, that's even better.
So you do that for a couple of years, and then you face again, I'm going to come back to all this because there's so much there. You face a decision point about whether or not to keep going or not. And I think this is the really interesting part of your story that we were chatting about via chat, which is you had this thing. It was good in so many ways, but also there were some struggles with it. It's hard to build something like that. So you face this decision to keep doing it or do something else, so talk me through that real quick.
Yeah, so there were kind of a ton of factors in place. I had been doing it for about 2 years, and I think for me, anytime I focus on something for that long and because it was something that I was trying to turn into a career, it was really, I feel like obsessive is almost too strong a word, but it's close to it, where I'm just thinking about masculinity, thinking about marketing, thinking about how do I get this off the ground? How do I make this really successful? And my wife and I, we go for walks with our dog all day long because working from home is great. And we can, we have a great spot. We can just walk around the block and, we'll be in within 15 minutes. And every single walk, I just kept talking about the same things over and over and over again. And it was kind of this moment where my wife was about to start a new job, and I just kind of, the uncertainty kind of got to me. After 2 years, it was just sort of, okay, I put in a great effort. I went for it, did it. I'm proud of what I did. And also I think I'm ready for something more steady. I'm thinking, I'm looking for what are the next steps for me in terms of growth? Where can I put myself in a position best to get to that next step for my life?
And so then you went and looked for jobs.
Yep. So okay. and throughout the story, at no point was I ever a formal content marketer. I was always a writer.
Yeah.
With the Dudefluencer project, I did content marketing. But outside of my wife and the materials that I was reading and like the groups that I was participating in, I had no real formal training. So trying to find what I was qualified for was challenging. And I'm not sure how much of that was just, me personally thinking, oh, I'm not qualified for this versus I'm actually not qualified for it. That sort of mental battle I was going through.
You find yourself a spot in November last year, and you've been working in a full-time gig up to the present. And so that brings us up to now, right?
Yep, that is where we are.
Cool. All right, let's go back because there's so many. I wrote down so many notes. I think when I look at your story, and you and I have chatted back and forth for a while now, because I don't know why, but Dudefluencer got on my radar at some point when you were working on that. So that was, you started that in the fall of 2019. And I don't know because I'm very interested in those kind of topics too, personally. I don't write about them much or talk about them much, but I read stuff in that area. And I think your writing got on my radar. And I can't remember if I actually subscribed to your stuff or what. I can't remember exactly how that went. But when you pinged me one day on Facebook, I think I'd started a thread and I was making some comments and you were like, hey, can I ask you a question about this? And I remember feeling Garrett doesn't know that he's a content marketer, even though he has every skill that content marketers have. And I feel so similar in that I started in journalism, right? And so all along the way, and before that, I was a failed college engineering student, right? I spent 2 years at college thinking I was going to become an electrical engineer, and I just wasn't a good enough student. It wasn't that I wasn't smart enough. I just wasn't. I had other priorities during college other than doing schoolwork, and that just doesn't work in an engineering program. And so my advisor was like, "You're either gonna fail out of the school, or you're gonna you'll either change your major today, or you'll fail out of the school at the end of the quarter." And so I changed my major just to English, thinking I don't know what I'm going to do with this, but I've always liked storytelling and writing and these kinds of things. And I was one of those kids that I was good at everything, but not really good at any one thing, if you know what I mean.
Yep.
I think a lot of us have that. And so I thought man, I failed that. And then journalism was fun, but the hours were terrible and the pay was terrible. just it wasn't a great career. And I found myself in content marketing around 2008, 2009. And I realized that, oh shoot, like I'm working for tech companies. I'm talking to engineers all the day long. Like I'm doing teaching and storytelling. Like I've been building this skill set the whole time, even though like nobody goes to school to learn content marketing, like in any sort of rigorous, well-defined way. And I hear some of that in your story. Like you were picking up all these skills as you went through this story to become a content marketer, even though like nobody told you that's what you were doing.
Yeah, I didn't even know what that was. I had no idea until I met my wife. I didn't even know it was a thing.
So your wife is a content marketer?
She is.
Very interesting. So she was a bit of your mentor. I didn't know that.
Yep. She was, she started very early on in her career, very similar to me in the sense of she didn't think English majors were, that's where you make money. Mm-hmm. And she kind of just watching her and watching one of her former colleagues kind of grow. I said, oh, this is an interesting career. I was still very much in, I'm going to save the world as a teacher at that point. Mm-hmm. But when it came down to it, most of everything I learned initially was from her.
Mm-hmm. Tell me about, let's go back. So tell me about teaching. Why did that light you up so much?
There's so many reasons. Yeah. And it differs to really, because the two schools that I taught at were so very, very different. The first school that I taught at was primarily English as second language schools. So I worked in the same county, but I worked at two different schools over my career there. And the first school was on the lower end of the spectrum in terms of funding, in terms of test scores. It was a lot of students that when I went to go interview and I got to the hotel, the kid at the front desk asked what school I was interviewing at. And I told him the name of the school and he just cringed. He said, oh, you should try an interview at this school, this other school. And I said, oh, well, that doesn't feel great. Did I make a mistake? Is my first interview going to go poorly? And I met the staff at the school that I was interviewing at. And I just kind of fell in love with everyone there and how dedicated they were. And I loved those students so much. I still keep in touch with a couple of them, but they just had the best stories. Technically, they didn't have that natural writing talent. So that was something that they got to grow into. Mm-hmm. But I think it's really important for a storyteller to have a story, to have those experiences. And they had the life experiences and they were willing to be vulnerable and share those stories. And I loved that. The other school, the magnet school, what I loved about working with those students were they did have a lot of that technical writing talent. They had some of just the most incredible, just natural writing ability that I had seen out of high school students. And watching those students grow as well into, a lot of them are going to college for different writing programs and really pursuing writing as a career. And watching that and watching us, we hosted open mic nights. I got to take the students to New York City, to NYU for a big magazine seminar where they just learned about different magazines on campus. And it was really great. And watching, at the end of the day, the reason why I love teaching will always come down to, I loved mentoring and watching young people grow and turn into, even more fully fleshed out human beings.
Right. What, as a content marketer today, in your work today, what pieces of that experience from teaching do you find yourself sort of tapping into? And let me put context to that. There are, I know, quite a few people in our community who have some sort of education background. So Katie Steffen, who, if you've listened to this podcast at all, you've heard her voice at various times over the years. Very good friend of mine, member of my team now. She is an English instructor at a junior college, like, or community college locally, and she's very good at it. But it just wasn't full-time work for her. And so she found content marketing, this whole sphere of content marketing, to be an area where her skills were really valuable. So to speak for a minute to anybody who's listening who has like that teaching background, and they're looking at content marketing going like, what is content marketing? And do I have skills here that are useful?
So from my perspective, education is very much about taking somewhat complicated ideas and breaking them down into ways that everyone, because a classroom is 30 diverse, different ways of thinking, different human beings, different life experiences, breaking down the same information into a way that is understandable, readable, comprehensible. And I think something really underrated about content marketing and education is, or I should say understated, is entertaining and personal.
Interesting.
I think being a good teacher, part of one of the a billion hats that you wear is you have to be entertaining. You have to be engaging, because you are competing against cell phones. You're competing against TikTok. You're competing against the kid next to you. You're competing against all of those things. So you need to be just as entertaining, if not more interesting than all of those things. And when it comes to content marketing, you want someone to read your entire article. So you need to be engaging. You need to be entertaining. You need to sort of put on that same hat, because your article is probably competing against not only everything else on Google, but everything else on the internet that could be more interesting.
Right. Cat videos.
Yeah. Cat
TikTok
videos.
Dances.
All of that.
Like everything.
All of that.
Nobody is required to read the content that you create as a content marketer. It's not quite like writing a paper for you that your teacher has to read, right?
Exactly.
That is so true. Like I've not heard it sort of, I'm not sure I've heard anybody sort of say it quite as eloquently as you just did.
Thank you.
that I'm stealing that phrasing, meaning like you have to be more or at least as entertaining as anything else that people might be thinking about. And I think, so to give you one example, like when I'm doing a presentation, right? And it could be an internal presentation to people I'm working with, like within the company, or it could be an external presentation at a conference or something like that. I did a few, and the first ones I ever did were just like PowerPoint slides, right? And people just they don't want anybody to stand in front of them and read off PowerPoint slides. Nobody wants that. And so I decided that like, if I was ever going to have to do that I wanted to give people an experience, meaning like I wanted them to have an experience in the room, like with each other and with me. And that I wanted it to be something that made them go, oh, this is different. Like, this is different than what the normal grind of going through like, and at the time, these were all internal meetings. And so, I really I read books on it, and I studied, I watched all Steve Jobs' presentations, how he did it. And I'm not saying
Please tell me you started wearing like the black turtleneck. And
no, but I do use slides that are like big slides with one word on it, that kind of stuff. And I love, even to this day, I love ending my talks or even my articles with one more thing, or one last thing. Cause it just leaves, that format just leaves people feeling like it is, cause it's how they feel is really the thing, right? Cause if you can make them feel like they had a good time, or it just felt fun, then they'll the next time you have to do a presentation, oh man, last time I did one with Nathan, this will be cool. This will be way better than what I would be doing otherwise. Yep. It's interesting. I never thought about that in the context of a teaching, position, but you're right. Like it's got to be way worse than when I was in school because of cell phones and stuff like that.
I think it's even been way worse than like since the 3 years that I've been gone.
Interesting.
I felt really bad. I left the year before COVID. So I wasn't there for all like Zoom teaching. And I have so many friends that have left the field over the past 3 years just because of everything that's happening in education. And there's some great teachers that have left because of all of these circumstances, and Zoom teaching just sounds incredibly challenging.
Do you think those people who, if you were teaching via Zoom, that's a skill set, right? That is actually really valuable in the world of content marketing as well. I feel like I'm on Zoom all day. It seems like teaching people stuff. And that's how I've done all my courses. So spoiler alert. I have not announced this anywhere. So if you're listening to this, you're the first to know. I'm in the process of, I'm going to experiment with some live stuff for the community, meaning like I'll just I might bring you on, Garrett. We'll just have a conversation, but other people will be able to join. It'll be a little bit more like an office hours with a guest kind of thing. And I'm really looking forward to that. Like, I'm really looking forward to having a little bit more interaction with the community. But my community is like spread out all over the world. So there's nowhere I can go to collect them in a classroom. So even that, like the Zoom skills, that's like a skill set in and of itself now.
Oh yeah, absolutely. And kudos to every person teaching on Zoom right now.
Oh, for sure. Especially with like the younger crowd, like my boys they're 8 and 11 now. And so especially my younger one, like what his teachers did during that period, like heroes, yeah, total heroes. Let's move forward to toxic masculinity for a minute. And let me tell you a quick story on this one. I don't know that I knew quite the impact of what this was for many years. When the Harvey Weinstein stuff happened a few years ago, and the Me Too movement started, there was a day in the Content Marketing Lounge when like that was happening, like that was dominating the social media stuff, and I'm sitting here going like, oh man, like what do I even do with like, because here I am, white guy, lived a pretty sheltered lifestyle growing up, not totally sheltered, but I just wasn't exposed to a lot of this kind of stuff, and so I threw this I remember I threw this question into the Content Marketing Lounge, and I just said like, hey, here's a special rule for this particular thread, which is like no guys allowed. Only women are allowed to like post on this particular thread. And just like if you have a story to tell in this area, like I know that people are looking for places to sort of talk about their experiences. And unfortunately, some of the places, like if you throw that on Twitter, you're going to get mobbed by the trolls, right?
Oh, yeah.
And I just said, I will protect this particular thread, meaning like if any guy comes in and acts like a jerk, like I'll boot them immediately. And like that might have been to this day might be the most commented on post in the history of the Content Marketing Lounge. And it was totally off topic, right? And like we weren't talking about content marketing strategy or anything. But because I created a space where like women could tell their stories, and I protected them from all of the angry sort of, male backlash that you sometimes run into online. And it's certainly not it's a small percentage of guys, right? But it's enough of them that they're loud. It was really eye-opening to me to see the experience of women and to see what happens when you sort of remove that element that you sometimes see in other places. And that was just one little hint into it. And what I've realized over the years is that the only people, I'll tell you, like I have this rule in my group that like nobody's allowed to do personal attacks at all, ever. And the interesting thing is that I very rarely have to enforce that because it just doesn't happen in the community because it's just a cultural thing for whatever reason. People tend to act the way everybody else is acting. The only people in 7 years of running this community that I've ever had to kick out for bad behavior is guys acting ugly toward women in the group. That's the only people I've ever had to do it. It's never happened in any other context. And I hate that. I just hate that so much. And that's just sort of one manifestation of it. So to the guys out there, and I know I have a lot of guys like this in my community who are like, yeah, I like being in a place where like the the over the top guys don't dominate the conversation. What you had so much that you wrote about over the years. What were a few things that were highlights for you that are like, yeah, this resonated with this crowd and this resonated with you. These are some things I really want people to know about masculinity.
So one thing is I want to commend you. I think your group is amazing. I feel like I probably haven't said that to you enough, but your group is incredibly welcoming and you have done an incredible job with that. So I'm really, when you're talking about running live shows, I'm super excited to start watching them. So I'll throw that out there first. And then second, for me, I think at the end of these sort of 2 years that I had focused on masculinity and really looked at research and information, the thing that stood out to me, like that affected and resonated with me most personally, was male loneliness. I think that male loneliness is incredibly dangerous. I think it's incredibly widespread, and there just isn't a lot that we are doing about it. And it isn't something that just affects men. It also affects their spouses as well. There's this idea that if a man is lonely or doesn't have close male friendships, a lot of that emotional weight gets put on their spouse. And that makes relationships incredibly difficult. Marriage is more of a struggle. And speaking with so many different people, I always say, they never teach you how to make friends as an adult. And I don't think I've ever had one person come back to me with, no, it's easy. This is how you do it. Like, I just don't think there's an easy way of making friends as an adult that isn't through
so true
work.
Even me, like you said it earlier, and I just immediately just like, oh, it's so true. Like,
yeah. And there aren't spaces where it's really optimal, especially even now, while so many people are working remotely. It's even harder to build those friendships over Zoom and chat. There is a book, and I feel so bad for not remembering it. But the author, he wrote an article in the Boston Globe about realizing he doesn't really have any friends anymore. And that article blew up on the internet and ended up turning into a book. And I got to chat with him. And one of my favorite parts of the book is he went to the New Kids on the Block boat cruise as like an investigative piece for himself, because he wanted to find out how these the New Kids on the Block cruise was filled with women. And he wanted to figure out, how did these groups of women become friends with each other? And, he's on the boat, he's watching, and then, Joey McIntyre comes out, and this entire audience of women just explodes with energy, and they start singing and they start dancing together. And something clicks for him in that he realizes they're able to make friends with each other so quickly because they're willing to be goofy, they're willing to be silly. And it's hard for me to remember the last time. I like asking the question, when was the last time you went dancing that wasn't at a wedding and you weren't drinking?
Yeah.
And for guys, I think that's rare.
High school,
yeah,
college.
Probably high school. But
Billy Baker. Billy Baker? Is that right?
Yeah,
I'm looking at your website.
Yes.
Yeah, there we go.
Billy Baker.
His book is called "We Need to Hang Out: A Memoir on Making Friendships," which I will pick up immediately.
Yes, it's fantastic.
Like dancing is high school, college, and even then I was awkward and not really super comfortable in those situations.
And being awkward is part of being vulnerable, and building close friendships is built on being able to be vulnerable with someone else. And to me, that is something that has really resonated. Is if I want to build a closer friendship, if I want to build a friend group, it's the ability to be vulnerable. And I know in our chat, when we were just talking about kind of setting up this podcast, this episode, I said, I'm really good at being vulnerable. And I like to think that I am. I like to think that I'm willing to talk about these stories and admit things like this in the hopes that it might reflect to someone else who may be in a similar position to me and say, oh, I relate to that. I can be reflective. I can be vulnerable. And, hopefully that can kind of cascade into this realization that vulnerability is not a weakness. It is a strength. And that is how you can build friendships. And that is how we can combat male loneliness and all of these other things. I know that is such a long-winded way of saying learning how to make friends as an adult, but man. Sometimes I love having guests on the show because they just take me. It stops being an interview. It stops just being like a conversation, right? And I'm just thinking about my experience. I was trying to think about the last time I really let loose at a concert or something, you know what I mean, like something like that. And I think the last one I can remember, it was I must have been a sophomore in college, and the woman who became my first wife was there, and we were not yet dating, but we were sort of doing that little dance before you date. You know what I mean? Like that we were kind of we were in the same friend group, and we all ended up at the same place. And I had a couple of my high school buddies with me that particular night, and it was a rock concert, one of those ones where everybody jumps on beat. I don't know if you've ever been to a show like that, when it gets the music really starts to ramp up. Oh yeah.
And it's one step down from the mosh pit kind of concerts. Not quite those, but very high energy, very loud. And you walk out of there just drenched in sweat. And she had never been to a show like that. And she had never seen me like that ever. Because it just was not my normal operating principles. But that level of sort of just showing people a different side of me, I think is not something I've done since. I mean, that's 20 years ago. That's 20 years ago at this point. And even now, I don't know if this is a guy thing. I think it is a bit of a guy thing in that like last year I coached my son's coach pitch team, and I'm very I'm on the field every night for 2-3 months with the other coaches of the team. I was the assistant last year, and I got to know some of the other dads through the coaching responsibilities, but I barely knew their last names. I didn't know who they where they worked. We didn't really develop personal friendships really, even though we were all really friendly. And just this year, it's the same group of kids. I've taken over the head coaching role. And so it's a lot of the same dads. And I've started to just be more intentional about going over to the dads and being and just having after practice, I feel it's really important for me to go over to and just find out hey, what do you do? What do you do when you're not out here tossing baseballs around with all these kids? And I'm starting to get to know some of them, but I had to be really I had to make a choice to do that. It didn't happen on its own.
And like taking that step, taking that choice is always difficult. It is, there's a bit of, it is kind of like dating in a way.
Oh, it's 100%.
And it's just, it's like, oh man, I hope he likes me. Oh, I hope he doesn't have anything to say about my shoes.
Right. What if he finds out I'm a marketer and he judges me?
Yeah.
Yeah, that's so true. So what could somebody, so hypothetically, what could somebody who has a community of people do that could help with this kind of things? I mean, should I be thinking about creating like a little like guy group? What kinds of things could help?
So something else that I'm going to steal from Billy Baker, and I give him credit for this, and I think he credits someone else in his book for this. So he says there's sort of 3 essentials that you need. You need someplace to be, something to do, and someone to talk to. And if you have those 3 things, that is sort of the building blocks to building a friendship. So kind of starting with having those available, and then, you know, kind of just taking that first step and starting that conversation. The comparison to dating, I think, is really apt, especially because you don't know what the reaction will be. You never know. Right. And I've had some really soft, gentle rejections. I've had some hilariously awful rejections, and I've had some, great acceptance, and and that goes for friendships and for dating. Yeah. And it's really been the same thing, and you kind of just don't know until you do it. And that's the frightening part. It is always easier. So in the case of you coaching, it is easier in the sense of these groups of men have to be together in a way. You have something to do, you have some place to be, and you have something in common to start talking about. And once you're able to kind of take that next step in terms of really getting to know these people, that's when those friendships grow. I think I mentioned dancing earlier, but I think any sort of situation in which you're put into a position where you need to be vulnerable. I think back to, I did improv classes for a little bit, and
I've been meaning to do that at some point, because it feels fun. It feels terrifying, but it feels like a skill set that would be super helpful.
Yes. It's the people who are professional improvers, and they have to be some of the smartest people in the world. They're just so incredibly talented, but they're making themselves vulnerable. I mean, there are fewer feelings worse than telling a joke and no one laughing.
Right. Like especially when you just came up with it on the spot. Like you just
exactly.
Oh man.
So that vulnerability is really essential, especially, if all of you are kind of in the same position, you're all telling jokes, and there's the potential for rejection, then you're probably doing the right thing.
That's great. I think about, to use the analogy of the dads at my out in the baseball league. Like the first 2 were there, right? A place to be, a thing to do. But like that last one, a thing to talk about, like even that, like I had to start being more intentional about that, even though we were already there, like doing the thing. So very cool. So let's talk for a minute about like this thing that we both share, which I think is a struggle that people in our kind of world struggle with sometimes, which is sometimes you make a thing and you love it, and some pieces of it work and some pieces of it don't. And you have to decide whether or not to give it up, just to be blunt about it, to give it up and go back and get a job. And so there are people that I've talked to in our community who they wanted desperately to work for themselves. They wanted to be a freelancer or a consultant or whatever, or they wanted to build, some product. And they did it, and they did it for a while, but it was either a lot harder than they thought, or it wasn't making them the money that they needed, or they found themselves at some sort of crossroads, and they were struggling with this decision about whether or not to go back, quote unquote, go back and get a job. I've heard it phrased as give up and go get a job again. And there's a lot of like emotion in that decision, to give up full-time freelancing and go back and get a job, to give up, a project that you built on the side, stop working on it full-time and go back and get a job. And I've made that choice. Like I made that choice in 2019, I made that choice to move away from full-time freelancing and take a full-time spot. And for me, it was sort of a mix of things. Like I felt like I had kind of done everything I could do on my own, but also like my income wasn't like, I was really burning out on it, and it was hurting my income. Yep. It wasn't that my skills were, it was like I had more work than I could get done. And I wasn't good enough at outsourcing or scaling to anybody other than me. And so I think the thing you were describing earlier was like, you'd go out on walks with your wife and just talk about that one thing over and over and over and again. That's so me in that period of my life. All consuming is how it felt. Like that's the way that I phrased it. Like the moment I woke up to the moment, like my eyes, or even the moment, like my brain finally gave up and let me sleep. It's just, I couldn't seem to think about anything else. And so for me, going back into the world of full-time employment gave me some structure that I really badly needed in that period of my life. And I had an opportunity come along. I was like, this is interesting. I'm going to go do this. And that was a really, really positive choice for me. Like that was the right choice at the right time. But I remember thinking like, how do I tell like the Content Marketing Lounge, who know me as this like successful full-time freelancer, how do I tell them that I gave up freelancing, full-time freelancing, and got a job? Like it felt like failure in that context, because it's off story, right? It's off message from the normal like entrepreneur, like freelance to freedom, like build your thing. It felt like failure to me, but it wasn't. And there was so much that I took from that experience being a full-time freelancer, and I was still doing some stuff on the side. And you were just, a place that I don't know how much of that resonates with you, but talk me through that, sort of how that situation felt for you.
I think you really kind of identified a lot of those emotions that I had. I remember telling people initially when I started transitioning away from the Dudefluencer project that I would say it failed. And I almost said it in the way that when you're sort of in high school and everyone's cracking jokes and that one joke's going to be made about you, so you make the joke first. That's what
mechanism.
Exactly. Yeah. So I'm like, if I say that it failed first, then maybe they won't necessarily think so, or that's one thing they can't say. But and it took me a little bit. I'll openly admit it took me a couple months to really realize that no, I didn't fail. I knew nothing about content marketing, and I grew this website from the ground up, and I learned all of these skills, and I met all of these cool people, including you. And like, how could that be anything other than a success? Like, did I turn it into the full-time career that I dreamed of? No, but that's okay, because it led me to where I'm at now, and it led me on to a different path. So for me, it was really just about taking a little bit of time, and really reframing, I think actually is probably a better word, the entire situation, because in so many different ways, I was a huge success personally and professionally, that just because I'm not working on the project full time and I switched sort of what I want to do doesn't mean that all of this wasn't worth it.
So it's that framing is the word, right? Meaning like, I remember thinking like I failed as a college student because of that experience with engineering. And like, it took me over a decade, like 15 years later, I figured out that like, oh, actually that experience gave me the language to talk to engineers, which is what I do all day long. And it wasn't a failure. Although that one like was one that took a long time to realize. And I think that, I've been running the Content Marketing Lounge for 7 years, and it's been the most successful thing I've ever created personally. But I still struggle when I like compare what I've done to like the big stories where people are like, I built this community and like I made $500,000 a month. You just get lost in what other people have done, and you define your success by their stories, right? Instead of defining success by your own stories. And that is so dangerous.
Oh, and especially in the world of social media and Facebook, when I started thinking about like, oh, maybe I'm going to start like a Facebook group or something. I started getting ads for this one particular group, and I'm not going to say their name. But like, they're like just all over my Facebook page, just ads of just really successful dudes in front of super expensive cars that I don't think I'll ever even see in my lifetime. And I'm like, oh man, they've got it made. And the truth is, like, there's always going to be someone more successful than you, better than you in some form or fashion. And that's fine. Like, that's okay. Comparing yourself to anyone else is always going to be a losing battle, because you're always going to be able to find someone who does what you want and does it better. In the world of masculinity, there are so many different really successful writers, coaches, group leaders, etc., that exist out there, that, you know, it's really easy to fall into a trap of, I'm never going to get there. And I think the same thing applies to content marketing. There's so many content marketers out there, and there's so many successful ones, and just comparing yourself to, you know, that upper echelon can be really draining and make what should be fun a chore.
Yeah. Yeah. Cause you feel like you're constantly failing when you're totally not.
Yeah, exactly. We've skewed the way we sort of see success and failure. And I think a lot of it is, I feel like I'm like an old man yelling at the clouds now, complaining about social media. But I mean, in a way, I do think that it has really skewed the way we see success.
Yeah.
Because
it's, I'm sorry to cut you off, but like, it's a highlight reel. You're looking at somebody else's highlight reel. Right?
Absolutely.
Like,
yep.
There's a thriving rental market in Miami for like high-end car, like Lamborghinis and all these kinds of things, that people go down there and rent for a day, and then they do like Instagram shoots. You know,
I love that.
It's just like, it's a booming business that for whatever reason is grown up in Miami. There are these rental places that just have those kinds of high-end cars. So, you know, so take that, make of that what you will. Like, even the stuff that you do see online, like I don't want to take anybody's success. People, you know what I mean? Like, if somebody's successful and they want to buy a nice car, I think that's great. Like,
yeah,
there's nothing at all wrong with like taking what you've built and doing things with that money that just make you feel good. Like there's nothing wrong with that. But that's, I think, different than the sort of, let's throw my success at other people's faces so that they feel shame about where they're at. And therefore they'll sign up for my thing. Right.
Yeah. Yeah.
That's a different thing.
Or this is how you know you're successful if you have X, Y, and Z, because that isn't necessarily true. You can own all these really expensive things, but that might not make you happy. I think that actually that's maybe what I'm trying to get at. Is there have been times in my life where, and I've struggled with my mental health, and I've written about it extensively, that I thought, maybe I'll accomplish this. Maybe I'll do this. And I would get to that point and 2 days later still be unhappy.
Right.
And
you think that you'll be happy when you get X or Y or Z, or you get to X or Y or Z.
Exactly. And I think sometimes that comparison that we make with other people, if I get to that, if I'm able to do that, then I'll be happy. Mm-hmm. That we all have our own personal happiness, that things that bring us joy. And that's what we should always try and strive to find and identify and work towards.
I think so. For me, just to give you mine, like what finally got me to stop thinking in those ways was I redefined success. I redefined what success of my community looked like. And instead of trying to make a certain amount of money or whatever, I just decided that I wanted to I just wanted to have moments where I got to help people. That was it. And I have so many moments like this where somebody will DM me or I'll be able to help them. I started a thread yesterday and I just said like, hey, what can we help you with? And whatever people wrote, I just tried my best in the comments to just give them something that would be helpful. Even if it was just like, I don't know the answer to this, but maybe somebody else would. I hope they'll chime in. Right. Those moments for me, they make me feel good. And I think like what you're talking about earlier, like watching people grow and succeed. That's why I love hanging out on like a baseball field with a bunch of 8-year-olds. Like I just love watching them grow and get better. And it's the same thing in my community. Like when I redefine success as that, then that's when it started to feel good to me, because I was no longer comparing myself to some arbitrary thing that somebody else had set as quote unquote success. It just felt good to help people. And I think that is like, we lose when we're so caught up in like money and finances and Lamborghinis and all these kinds of things. Like we just lose the simple joy of like being somebody who's able to help other people. I think that is like the most fulfilling thing for me.
Yeah. Yeah. Just being a person that when you close your eyes at night, that you're happy to be, you're proud of.
Yeah, for sure. Do you mind if I read something that like went back and forth in our chat message?
Sure. Absolutely.
A year ago or so.
Oh boy.
So you were at this crossroads place. And I think I was reading through this earlier and I thought, man, this is powerful. But I won't read yours word for word. I'll read mine is what I really want to say. But you just to give the context, you're looking for suggestions for finding your first quote unquote official content marketing position, because you knew you'd kind of come to this place where Dudefluencer had, it had reached the point where you're ready to sort of move on to the next thing. And I have to say, like, people reach out to me every now and then, and like, I could tell you were like, should I DM him? Should I not? Like, I think maybe I could. But you had this project and I could feel you in your question saying like, I did this thing and it didn't work. Like it didn't work. It didn't become what I wanted it to become. And what I told you, I think I want to say what I said to you, but like say it to anybody who might be listening, which is like, if you've built your own thing, even if that thing doesn't become like wildly successful, like or the big project of your dreams, like in the context of like putting that on your resume as a thing that you've built on your own, like that is wildly attractive to potential employers. And I can't even say that strongly enough. Like people don't have things on their resume as content marketers where they're like, oh yeah, and I built this following, or oh yeah, I spent 2 years building this blog and it did all these things just on my own, meaning like nobody paid me to do it. It wasn't part of a team. And so what I wrote to you is like, hey, as far as the job goes, you'll be an amazing candidate. And I mean that 100% as someone who recently combed through hundreds of resumes. I think I was hiring for a position at the time. No one, and I mean no one, has the experience you do building an audience in a project like this. And I've never seen at the time, I'd never seen a hotter market for marketing people. That's starting to cool off a little bit, but there's still lots of opportunities out there. And then we talked a little bit about like how should I highlight this in my resume? And I said, don't be afraid to talk up that Dudefluencer stuff. I'm guessing maybe it feels like a failure on some level, but like maybe it didn't become a massive thing that made you all kinds of rich. That's how Content Marketing Lounge has felt to be sometimes. But to an employer, it will look amazing because no one has a full skill set to build. Very few people have the full skill set to build and promote a brand the way you have. Even if it didn't turn into a wildly successful business, it's still far more than what most candidates have on their resume. And that has been true for me with the Content Marketing Lounge, meaning like once people figure out that like I have this thing that I built on my own, they're like, how did you do this? And that the reaction I get from people within the sort of when I interviewed for jobs and stuff was it just made that whole job interview process very like it just made me a much more appealing candidate. So I don't know. If that helps anybody, I wanted to sort of tell somebody who might be sitting in a similar position now or in the future that like building these kinds of things, whether they're side projects or whatever, like they don't have to become wildly successful to be very, very very successful in terms of giving you something great that you can say that you built.
Yeah. I would also say you are 100% correct in terms of me being very nervous to message you first.
I'm glad you did.
I'm like, Nathan he's like a celebrity. He's like a content marketing celebrity. And
my wife calls me mini famous. That's the joke in our house.
I mean, you are.
And yeah, it's true. And like, to be clear, like I did that on purpose, right? Like, like I worked really hard to become like well-known by a very small number of people. And that's the play. And that's what I was trying to do. And so for a while she used it to tease me. And then it became like, well, actually really like it's becoming more and more true.
Well, and especially the fact that you responded to me, I was just so excited. and the fact that you and I still chat makes me like, it feels like I have a mentor or someone in my corner who is very important in this field, in this world. So I want to thank you actually very, very much for even just taking the time to respond to me, even initially. That meant the world to me.
Well, I'm glad for that. I think I hope that the experience was meaning the experience of like letting go a little bit of the thing that you had worked so hard on, and going back into the quote unquote regular workforce. I hope that experience was, I hope you found it to be like, oh yeah, like, you know, no job is perfect, right? Like it's just that every job comes with like stresses and these kinds of things. But like, I hope you found it to be like, oh yeah, this was the right move at the right time.
Yeah. I don't have any regrets about the decision I made or the choices I've made. I think it does the same way that I still love education. I still love all of the work that I did with Dudefluencer. I met so many incredibly cool people. Mm-hmm. I read so much more research than I ever would have thought I would read. I know more about men's fashion than I would have ever even thought to think of. So, I mean, I just learned all of these new things and, you know, I don't regret it for a second. I thought it was just the right time.
Yeah. Yep. Well, let me wrap it up with a couple questions. what is something that you really hope people remember after listening to this conversation?
That anything that you might see as a failure, hopefully they can reframe it into something as a success, because there are successes, and failing is probably one of the best things you can possibly do, because that's where you learn.
Yeah.
If you're just winning all of the time, then you're not learning anything. You're not getting better.
Yeah, for
and
sure.
You know, that's the goal, I think, for life in general, is we just want to keep growing as human beings and be better than the person we were when we went to sleep.
Who should reach out to you? Who's the type of person who you'd love to connect with?
I would love to connect with anyone. I just love talking to people, actually, in general. I'm open to chatting with anyone. If there's any former educators looking to get into the field of content marketing, I'd be more than willing to chat with them and kind of give them some guidance. If anyone is looking for any sort of ideas about, masculinity or anything regarding, research, any sort of resources that I can help with, I would be more than happy to share. And similar to how, you were there for me, I would love to be able to kind of give back to other people.
Cool. Now, all the Dudefluencer stuff is still out there. And so it's very good stuff. I recommend it. I will link to it either below this, this video, or in the podcast notes if you're listening on audio. Are you doing any of that actively anymore?
Not at the moment. I'm currently kind of working on a project that's a little bit more longer form regarding male friendship, but that isn't in a space for me to start really talking about it yet.
Cool. Well, whenever that's ready, come back on and we'll talk about it. Okay.
Yes.
I'd be glad to sort of go into some, but this is so much we didn't get into today that I like, there's more to say on these topics. What is the answer that you gave to the screening question for the group, which is flight, teleportation, or the ability to start and stop time on command?
Oh, I don't know if I remember, but if I had to answer right now, I think I would say teleportation.
Yeah.
Yeah. And this is such a silly reason why, but there's so many times. So my wife and I, we often take our dog when we go to visit my family in Buffalo, and it's like an 8-hour drive. And I know that's not long, but sometimes I just wish I could just like teleport. I know planes exist, but it's like 4 hours in and we're in the middle of nowhere, Pennsylvania.
You gotta like go to the airport and it's 2 hours screening and all this stuff. Yeah.
I'm like, can I just teleport? I think that's what it is. I just want to get to places quicker.
I have a friend who's like, why can't they just fax me? Nobody's like using those machines. Just fax me. I love that. I think that's hilarious. So very cool, Garrett. Well, thank you so much for coming on the show. We will put links to all your stuff in the show notes. It's been great chatting with you.
Yeah. Thank you for having me.
Oh, there's so much good there. Thank you, Garrett, so much for coming on the show and for, if I could put it this way, for being a really good dude. I think you inspire me. I think, and I think especially the stuff about masculinity and finding friends and being intentional about all that kind of stuff. That there's so much. I'm going to go. I'm in my garage now, late at night, recording the intro and outro for this, and I'm going to go inside and talk to my wife for a while about some of those things. But for all of you listeners, there's sort of one other sort of thing I want to say that just to hit it again, I think there are those of you who, and I've talked to a bunch of you, and I've done it too, where maybe you started a thing and you thought it would make you incredibly financially successful, to put it that way. You thought you would become the next, 7-figure marketing agency or 6-figure freelancer, or you would have this financial security that people, you see in all these stories, right? And maybe it didn't happen for you, or maybe it hasn't happened yet, or maybe it's taken so much longer than you thought it would. That's happened to me at least 3 times. There was a period of my career where 2018, really 2017 is really when it started the first time. It was the first time I tried to build up an agency. I had become a really successful solo freelancer, and I got really good at landing clients, not just landing clients, but getting clients to like be interested in working with me, to the point that I just didn't have enough bandwidth. And I had raised prices to the point that where I was making good money. And it was kind of at that point where, other people start to say like, you need to hire somebody else to do the work. That way you can just run the business. And I tried it, and it bombed. It just totally bombed. And I tried it again in early 2019, and it bombed again for separate reasons. The first time because I wasn't charging enough, just didn't do a good job doing the financial model. The second time, I charged more, but still didn't do a very good job building like the internal sort of infrastructure of delivering kind of stuff. And so I ended up like I wasn't good enough at delegating, right, my own work. And so I ended up doing way more work than I should have, and just ended up like paying people to do work, and I redo the work. I just ended up with no profit for myself. And so I had an experience working for a company in the middle there, and then tried it a third time at the end of kind of 2019 or end of 2020 going into 2021. And that time I failed, not because I wasn't charging enough and not because I didn't know how to build the machine, but just because I was so burned out, just personally, professionally. I was so tired. It was right in the middle of the pandemic. I'd had a very negative experience leaving the job that I had left, and I just found myself unable to work. And what I found out was that this thing that I got really, really good at doing, which is creating content. Like I'm very good at creating like 1 or 2 specific kinds of content, and like I know I know so little about so many other things in the world, but I know so much about like the things that I'm good at, and I can sell that stuff for high prices. I can deliver it. I can do the work, and I realized that I needed to be more active as a creator, and so I started to sort of build a team around me to take care of all the sort of the logistical kind of things. And that was starting to work, but the weak link in that process was just I was unable to write for several months there. I had to use every trick in the book to force myself to sit down and do the client work, because I just didn't. There's just nothing in the world I wanted to do less at that period of my life than sit down and create content. And it took me a while to realize what was happening, and it was just that like I'd come to this place where I was so interested in going deeper with companies that I found myself just sort of mentally like trying to figure out, like I spent way too much time like digging around people's Google Analytics, because I was just really curious, and I wanted to know how my content was being consumed, and how much time people spent on it, and how I could optimize it, and just all these kinds of things that were just not what I was getting paid to do. And I don't know if you've ever had a realization like that, where the thing that you're just drawn to are not aligned with the thing that you're doing, like that people expect you to do. That's a sign that maybe you should be doing something else. And so, but meanwhile, I was just burning through money. I got to this point where there's a friend of mine that I hired to do some of the work, and I owed her $500 at the beginning of the month for the following month, and I just didn't have it. I just did not have $500 to give her, and I sent her a note, and I'm like, I'm just like, I feel awful. Like, I want you to keep doing the work. I'm not going to be able to pay you for about 2 weeks until I get, I was expecting like a $3,600 payment for one of my clients who came through. But I just told her, like, I just felt awful. like I felt like I had failed her. I felt like I had failed my family. I felt like I had failed myself. I felt like I was failing the Content Marketing Lounge community, who, y'all look up to me as somebody who goes and does all these great things and then comes back and teaches you all the lessons. And so let me give you this one, which is that you may find yourself at times where you've created a thing, and most things in life, like most business ideas and, the blog you started and the YouTube that you started and all this kind of stuff, they don't fail. They just don't succeed to the level that you hoped that they would. And those two things are very different. Like when you create a YouTube channel and 27 people are huge fans of it and 3 people that comment on every video, that is a monumentally awesome thing that you've done, but it's not going to pay the bills, right? And so you've created a thing, and you've created like something valuable in the world to other people. And there are very few people who can actually say that they've done that. There are very few people, even there are lots of highly paid people that I've run into over the years who work inside of companies who have never built their own thing. And that doesn't mean that they're not smart. It doesn't mean that they're not capable. It just means that they don't have the experience that you do. And what I want to say to you is that if you have created a thing and you feel like, oh no, like it didn't become wildly financially successful, and now I'm staring down the decision of do I quote unquote give up on my dream and go back and get a job? What I want to tell you is that going back and getting a job is not failure. Going back and getting a job is not giving up. When I made that decision to really fully like lean in and be like, no, I'm going to go back and get a full-time job, not because I have to, but because I want to, but because that's the next right thing for me. It was absolutely the right decision for me. And it was hard to bring that decision to the Content Marketing Lounge. I did that twice, right? I did that once in 2019, once again in 2021. And to say that I was making that decision was hard. Because I was afraid of what people might think. I was afraid that they might think that I was a failure for not having built a massive content marketing agency, right? But it wasn't. And what I found when I got back inside of companies was that I had so many skills that other people just did not have, because I had done all this entrepreneurial work and I was able to sort of think like a founder. Even the people who run tech companies, most of them, a lot of them are run by founders, but a lot of them are not. And so even the people who run tech companies, they don't know how to do what you know how to do. They don't know how to create a thing that's valuable in the world. They don't know how to create and run a business. They don't know how to do the customer support. They don't know how to do sales conversations or do closing conversations. Like, you have so many skills and so many experiences that are so valuable that you don't even realize. And so just understand, from the very bottom of my heart, what I want to say is, just because that thing that you created didn't make you Lamborghini successful, it doesn't mean it's not a failure, or that doesn't mean it's not a success, and it doesn't mean that you're a failure. What it means is that you did the thing that the universe was calling you to do. You did the thing that you felt like you had to do, or something inside of you would die, and you took it to this place, wherever that place is. And that is a monumentally successful achievement that you have in front of you. And there may be a next right thing for you to do that's not the same thing as what you hoped it would be or what you dreamed it would be. That doesn't mean you have to give up on your dream. That doesn't mean you can't continue to work on your thing as a side project. And that certainly does not mean that you're a failure, or that the experience that you've had hasn't been a success or won't help you in so many ways that you can't even see right now. And so I'll leave you with this, which is, I promise you, nobody who matters cares which drive anyway. Take care of yourself. Be good to yourself. I'll talk to you again very soon.